We are thrilled to welcome everyone for a virtual studio visit with Not Vital, who is coming to us live from his home in St, Switzerland. I'm currently at Hauser Wirth Somerset, where Not Vital's spectacular exhibition SCARCH is currently on view until 6th of September. The show is organized with Olivier, Renaud-Clément, and Giorgia von Albertini, who will also be with Not in the studio, together with Stefano Rabolli Pansera. For the next 50 minutes, they will explore the principles developed by Not, such as the inversion between inside and outside, and including references to the exhibition in Somerset, as well as a selection of global projects. Just before we start, I wanted to mention that as part of Hauser Wirth's Art for Better initiative, the gallery continues to donate 10% of its gross profits from all online exhibitions to the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund for the World Health Organization. You can learn more at covid19responsefund.org. Thank you for joining us for In the Studio with Not Vital. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to hand over to Stefano and St, just outside Not Studio.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you to the studio visit of Not Vital. It's a great pleasure to be in this small village of the Lower Engadine called St. And I'm at the moment just outside the Not Vital studio. I am delighted to show you this is the house where Not Vital was born on the date of the opening Olympic Games in St. Moritz in 1948. And this is precisely the house where he was born, that later on became his studio. There are already elements that are quite awkward for the Engadine Valley, like this beautiful sculpture ceramics and this very mysterious yellow shape, which is a sculpture for a model for a school in Africa. And I'm delighted to be welcomed by Giorgia von Albertini, who is an international curator who works very closely with Not Vital and is going to welcome us today. Good afternoon, Giorgia.
Pleasure to meet you all. So as Stefano said, we're in front of Not's house, the house he grew up in, and the house that today is still his home and his studio. So I think we can enter together to meet Not, if he opens the door. I can hear him coming.
Hello. Good afternoon. Not. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to my house, to my studio.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here because your studio is like a physical manifestation of your way of thinking and the way you operate. And the way it shows the context that nurtures many of your intuitions and many of your artworks. So I think that it is a wonderful setting to really discuss about some of the recurring ideas of your practice. Yeah.
Thank you.
So.
And it's full of, as you will see, sculptures by Not. It's full of objects that he collects, of memorabilia. Here, for example, there is an early work that's entitled La Vigne that Not made in 1971. So this work is about a town here in the Engadine named La Vigne.
Yeah, it's a small town, as you can see the map here. It's not far from here. It doesn't have sun for a few months in the winter time because of the mountain, shape of the mountain across the valley. And everyone knows when they get the sun again. So I went from house to house, this is in 1970, and asked, so when you receive the sun again? And you can see that actually sometimes it takes like 2 weeks or 10 days between one house and the other. So the idea was, a conceptual idea, of course, to reshape the mountain so the small town would have sun at the same time.
Yeah, I think that this early work already contains many elements that you will develop later on in your practice. First of all, there is a deep-rooted relationship with the place you are from, with the Engadine. And another element is that very often your work is associated to architecture, but there is always an element of temporality and the situation that emerges. And in this case, it's some sort of like epiphany, the epiphany of the return of the sunshine that we take for granted, but here in the lower Engadine Valley is a really important moment.
Yeah, for because it's a valley that runs east-west, so you have this intense light, and so
there is another early work of yours that's called Being in the Shadow of the Tree. Maybe we can look at the slide. And that work too is very much durational and concerned with the sort of environment you are in and the landscape you're embedded in. So for this work, you kept moving together with the shadow.
Slowly, yes, just to see how fast the sun would move. Yeah, that's me this year. So it was like seeing like this whole progress of like the small, very, very slow progress in being in the shadow of the sun the whole afternoon.
There are 3 slides, and I think like clicking through these slides, one can see you moving together with the shadow of this tree. And then there is another early work of yours that was entitled Object Unlimited by Space that you did in 1968, so even before these other 2 works. And that work for me really sort of contains the essence of your preoccupation with the limits of space and how space is structured. So maybe
yes, I mean, like every object that surrounds us, and most of the objects, like this bottle, right, has a beginning and an end. So what I wanted to do in this sculpture is to break that, to kind of like make something limited. So you don't know where it starts, you don't know where it ends. So this would go through this house and would go into the garden, come back to the house, and disappear someplace in the neighbor's house.
it was like a row.
It was a row, yeah.
Yeah.
So like I showed this, like I think this was my first show when it was 20 cool, was like it left the gallery, came out of the wall, left the gallery, went out into the street and disappeared.
Yeah. And so this row sort of ran through his
all through the
house.
house, yes. And it was probably also because I grew up here, and it was maybe an idea to really break boundaries, to get away, to be able to have no limitation in a way, or at least to only to stay in this vacuum.
Yeah, and these are many objects in your studio, which I think is fascinating because it is at the same time like a portfolio of your work, a museum, an archive, and there are many objects that are like the prefiguration of other works that you're going to do.
Like and this slab here in white marble, it actually works. You know, I don't know. I mean, you won't be able to break it probably, kind of. You would use this, but it's kind of like
and
transformation of these other parents.
And I think especially the main space of your studio really sort of exemplifies this notion of the studio as a laboratory, since it's full of models, of projects that are work in progress, of sculptures.
Yes, it's more, that's right, it's more like a studio for works in progress, which is a lot. This has mostly to do with my works in architecture, buildings I've been doing in Africa or in South America and so on.
So on this wall you have different images of SCARCH, so sculpture architecture projects that you realize all over the world. And one of them, the big one that we can see here, depicts a Quran school named Makaranta that you realized in Niger, in the city of Agadez, in 2003.
Yeah, because when I went to Niger, Niger is one of the poorest countries in the world. Agadez is 1,000 kilometers from Niamey, from the capital. And the land I got was at the outskirts of this town. So it was very, very poor. And once I counted the children, there were 150 children. And they didn't have a school. It was pretty much just a hole in the earth. So I decided to make a school for these 150 children.
Yeah, probably there is a picture that we could show of the empty school now.
Yeah, there is a slide where you can see
exactly
this pyramid structure of the school that you would like.
So the idea was like, so they could sit in the morning on this side, use the pyramid from the other side, depending on the sun and so on. But what happened is that it attracted so many children that at the end there were 500. So now you don't have a school anymore. Your children don't go to school, they go on top of it, right? And so it's kind of like a kinetic sculpture that sings, that moves, shouts. And so I believe that this is actually where I wanted to go, or would like to do it again, to be able to make a sculpture which has to do with architecture, but also has a social impact. And if you have these three combined, I think it works.
Sculpture, architecture, and social purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as we said at the beginning, it's a Quranic school, and I really like these exercises by the children where they drew their own school. So you once told me that these drawings happened because you made or devised this school without actually having.
There was never plans with all the works, with all the houses I made in Africa, because at the beginning, actually, I only had like 2 hours to have an idea how my house should be there. But when the first workers arrived and actually this drawing, they didn't know what it meant, because most people don't read it, right? So just throw the plan away. And for a show, which this was shown at the Louisiana, they asked me to provide plans for this work. I didn't have any. So like, what I did is actually I asked the children to draw their own school, and this is what came out. It's really great. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's also how the kids see their own school.
Yeah.
There is even something that I find quite subversive in this plan, because generally the schools are exposed to the teacher and they are judged by the teacher. I have the impression that this is the other way around. The teacher, in a way, is exposed to the judgment of students and children.
Yeah, you see, like some of the kids take care of the others, right?
Exactly, and the teacher usually stands
In front.
below the kids in the hot sand, and the
Because it's
kids
maybe
are
not even able to climb.
Yeah. Did you do other projects in Africa?
Sorry.
Did you do other?
Yes, I mean, this was the first, was of course I built my house in Agadez, then this was like the second one, and then I was able to buy a piece of land outside of Agadez in an oasis, and there is this one sculpture.
Probably we can show the next image.
The next slide depicts an image of House to Watch the Night Skies, which is a project that you realized in 2006 in this oasis.
Okay, yes, because like I was watching, while I was in Africa, I would spend 2-3 hours every night just watching the stars, which is incredible, especially in the desert, no electricity, no. So it was phenomenal. So I built this house just so I could sit on top and just watch the sky.
Because it is devised to sort of climb up and just lay down on top of it.
And from here you cannot see even the way you climb.
Yeah.
You told us before that it has a double function. This building.
No, it's another. The next, because it was so hot, and it's very, very hot there, and it was very, for me sometimes it was very difficult to live there. So I had to build a structure house where I could cool off, and then I built this house that also it's open in the top, has an opening, and so the heat rises. But also it had this other function that no sand would come into the house. It has like this double function, which I like very much, to have something that has a double function, like in the park in St. There's a handrail, but also the water line, the same thing. So you don't know which one is more important, but both are important. So that was like this other house I made.
And another important project that began in Niger and that evolved to be a global project is your House to Watch the Sunset. So the first iteration of that project was made in 2005 in Niger.
Yeah,
so maybe we can move to the next slide.
It took quite a long time to do it because this is full of bricks. And again, I mean, If I was not watching the sky, before I was watching the sky, I was watching the sunset. And the sunsets are, for someone who has been to Africa, they know, but it's very difficult to imagine how fast it goes, how intense it is. You can almost hear the sunset, right? And in no time, it becomes dark. So this daily spectacle I wanted to see, but since I was in an oasis, I had to go up quite high. And so I told the workers to build this tower, and they said, well, in French, he said, tu as perdu tes chèvres, meaning did you lose your goats, meaning did you go crazy, you went crazy now. But they succeeded, and when it was finished, I wasn't aware while we was fabricating this, that actually in itself it was pure. That means like you could not add anything to it, you could not add another brick or take one away. I mean, it was as it was like. And so during that time, I think it was 2006, I decided then to build one of these structures on every continent. And so far, I've built 3, but 2 are going to happen.
And then a model of House to Watch the Sunset, which I believe is a third of the original size, is also currently on view at your exhibition in Somerset. So maybe on the next slide, the aluminium model of House to Watch the Sunset will be visible. And there too, there is this interesting inversion that you made the model after the fact.
Yes, that was
you
like,
built the structure
like the model. The model usually, you know, it's most of the times it's reversed. Since I'm not an architect. I don't make plans and build the models. I usually just make it. And so this model was done afterwards. It was done a few years later, and that's the one which is now in Somerset. To have an idea of the scale and so on. It's 1/3 of the. And then it went on to America. So I've got this land in the Amazon, and there. In the Amazon in Brazil, and that is made out of this very heavy wood, which doesn't float. And so that's also a big challenge to build this one, because you could only bring the wood during the rainy season, and they had never done anything like that. It's far away, it's like 60 kilometers from my house, completely in the jungle. And
what's interesting also about this House to Watch the Sunset project is that the shape and the dimensions of the structure are always the same, but the material always varies. So in Niger, it was made with bricks and mud. In the Brazilian Amazon, you used local wood.
Yeah, it's very easy to build. It's as easy to build than anything like a cake or anything like that, because it's like everything is 30 meters high. It has 3 stairs. Each one is 13, 26, and 39 steps. The angle is 45 degrees. So actually, everyone can build this. You know, it's like, and it's the easiest thing.
You have a recipe for it. And next year, so you're currently also working on a version of House to Watch the Sunset for Tonga in the South Pacific and one for Mongolia. So the version for Tonga will be realized in aluminium, and something is special about that version because before finding final rest in Tonga, it will be exhibited within the Church of San Giorgio Maggiore in Venice as part of the Venice architecture biennial.
That's right.
Which is, we have a slide with
of
the
course,
renderings.
we're supposed to be there now, but it's going to be next year, right?
Yes.
Because like next year, it's going to be the architectural biennale.
Of course. And then is this extraordinary set of models and experimentation even cast a very interesting light on the use of materiality and your relationship with the context, which is always very complex and rich.
I mean, it's like when you go someplace, like, of course.
For example, this is an interesting set of models.
This is also made in Niger by the Tuaregs. The Tuaregs, they don't like gold, they like silver, and they're very good silversmiths. So I made a few sculptures in silver, And one day, very early in the morning, it must have been 6 o'clock in the morning, you get up very early in Africa, they came and said, no, what is the next sculpture? So like, I had to come up with something very fast and said, make my portrait. So you can see that this is all related to the date of birth. This is the day, this is the month. So like mine is 15, 2 centimeters high for February and so on. So each one has a different size head here, right? I mean, you see like, this is Jean Genet, is born on the 19th of 12, December 1910. And this is the head of Alvarado. This is probably 4th of, I would have to measure, 4th of February, right? Yeah. But this is the body. So you actually have like the bodies tend to be similar, but the heads are quite different.
But so you did portraits of a series of different people from history, people that you admire, writers, musicians, architects, but On View in Somerset is a very specific installation that you made following the same principle. So they're numeric portraits of people and they're portraits of 100 architects.
And they're done in granite, yes.
Yes.
I decided to, I made a list of 100 architects. It's actually 101 because it's unbelievable. So those are done in granite. And it's the same principle. I mean, it's just like always in centimeters, you have, again, the date of birth, the day, the month, and the year. So mostly it's 1800 or 19.
And these are hollow. And before you really explain something fascinating about the materiality, which is always entangled in a process, because it's very difficult to get the silver.
Oh yes, it's a big challenge. I mean, they have to leave. They had to go for Agadez, go 1,000 kilometers to get the silver, and you cannot get like you can get 1 kilo here, 2 kilos there. So it's this huge work, and then they have to return by bus 1,000 kilometers and make the plates. Yeah. And this is all chased. I mean, it's all hammered. But it's not that you can buy a plate in that size like you could do here in Switzerland. No, it's all chased. And so it's with many things I do, it's like the transportation is a big challenge too.
Or the process and the transformation, because what we consider a given, the materiality, is already like the result of a collective process. And very often, the site that we consider a given is really a process that includes time and the involvement of people. There is always like a depth and the richness that your sculptures reveal that we often take for granted.
The other important thing which I found out over the years is that you have to also give these people a big challenge to do something. You know that, I mean, the silversmith in Tours, in Agadez, they make these croix d'Agadez, which they do it to sell it to tourists and so on. But this is a completely new approach to it. And they, of course, they like to do that. But also, there's like a whole community living from that. That means like they're not coming to Europe. They don't want to come to Europe. They love to stay there and do their work.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, how...
And you like to really always work with sort of specialized craftsmen, and that's why you travel a lot. You also travel, for example, for bronze to Italy, or for marble, you work with steel in Beijing, with silver.
Yeah, you just have to...
Probably is interesting even to discuss about the use of materiality in your drawings. How do you generally apply different materials? And there is probably an image that we can show.
These drawings, I just saw today that the first ones were like in '83 in New York, in my studio in New York. I'm still using the same size paper, actually the same thing. And at the beginning, there were ideas for sculpture, then it moved on to architecture projects. So I think this is a hotel in Kuala Lumpur, something like that, of course. How to build it, I have no clue. Or like a house to like a hotel here in the village of St, which looks like a cloud. It's just like the first impulse of something to do. But since I'm not an architect, I have the freedom also to move on in that direction, not to know how to build, because
But I think it's not only a freedom of ideas or the freedom of your artistic license. I'm very much interested in these drawings too, because they sort of transcend the two-dimensional and because you use very unorthodox materials. And I think your use of materials comes from the fact that you mostly draw while you travel.
Well, actually, the first drawings, as I said before, were done in New York. Then I went to places like Cuba, drawings in Thailand. But now I found a place to make my drawings, and that's in Brazil. In Rio, they used to have a the painting shop, I mean, but now that's closed, so I have to find my material elsewhere. It's in the streets, it's in hardware stores, it's in pharmacies, and in different places like that.
So this drawing that depicts a house for sale, you used cotton pads, then there is another one of a house with these wooden sticks that
just
you
for
steer
the coffee. And this is
dental floss. And then you also use organic matter sometime, like in this drawing that's entitled Nest.
Yeah.
So that's a nest, and then below we read Paraná do Mamori. So Paraná do Mamori is the place in the Brazilian Amazon where you realized various projects.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how this drawing relates to this natural cathedral.
Yes.
Yes, the Amazon rises for, I think, 6-7 meters a year, depending on the rainy season. And so after the rainy season, when you walk through the land, because suddenly you have much more land, you lose half of it during the rainy season. You cannot go over to that side. But then afterwards, it's fantastic to go over and find what nature has built for you. I mean, this is like a place where you can go in. It has a door, and inside it's huge. It's like, that's why I call it cathedral. It's like as big as a temple, right? So this is like, you find this. I mean, many times people ask me, how do you how do you proceed in this project? It's actually just finding.
Yeah.
Not so much looking for.
Yeah, and this is actually like the ingenuity of a vision that is always able to discover from what is under our eyes, and we often neglect or even struggle to recognize. I think this is really amazing.
Absolutely.
And probably once he said, like, when you're tired of searching, you reinvent or you relearn the finding, and this is exactly what happens, right? I mean, also you said before, like, when you travel, you always find someone who is like really good in what they're doing. I mean, you go to Laos and you see this woman making paper, but what she does, she puts like flowers in it. So the next day I come and I pick up what I find, like I find a bottle, I find a sock, I find a frog, and then I go there, and then it's great for her because she never thought, like, oh my God, you can put a frog inside the paper. And so this challenge is great, but it has to be also both sides.
Yeah, and this reminds me this beautiful drawing of the feather onto the paper, which was probably a lift.
An elevator.
Yeah.
So you found this feather, and the feather sort of illustrates movement.
Yes, it's kind of like the feather, of course, being so light. You think like, okay, it already most probably came down. Yeah. So at one point it probably went up too. So how would it be to build something like that, like a lift, right?
Yeah.
So your drawings are all sort of a space for experimentation. They are playful, they're realized in a variety of materials.
And they're done fast.
And they're done fast.
I think it's very important that this process goes quite fast. I mean, it has to, even though one is quite different from the other, but that you have this kind of rhythm in order to reach what you want to reach.
Yeah.
This one is just folded and it's a church. It's called Igreja. The other one is 7 roundabouts. So here, what did you place? Stickers or something? And then you drew with a pen.
Just go around, yes.
Or you just went around super fast.
Yeah.
And then the tower is also a very frequent symbol or form in your drawings. And it's also an important form in your work. So just recently, you realized a big commission for the museum in Zurich, which is also here in the Engadine, and here we can see.
But the tower, it starts quite early. I write this article, book, right?
Yeah.
Where it says eating architecture. And when I was a child, I wouldn't eat, and so my father would carve little houses and towers, and I would eat the tower, I would eat the house. So like, I mean, already at 2 or 3 years old.
Here we have an image of this cheese tower, the North is speaking about on the black background.
Yes, yeah, I get
sometimes also the models, if I make models, they're like unconventional material. So like the tower,
this is a cheese tower, correct?
Yes.
the tower is like also in the town here in St, because we have this 65 feet tall tower, which is not a nice kind of, it's kind of has always been kind of like the backbone of my drawings also. And then I could find a piece of marble in Ferrara a few years ago.
Yeah.
That is
Probably we can put the image as well of the tower in
Zurich.
This is like how it's the block was over 10 meters by over 2 meters in square. So like here it's like I wanted to make this tower, but not just excavating from the bottom. That would have been easy, but that everything would have to come out of the door. That means like over 100 tons of material came out of the door. A huge challenge for this.
And very long process, yeah.
Process. If you had emptied the inside of this store from here, would have been much faster. Just to do that took really a year and a half. So this is now in Zurich.
And on the next slide, I think we can see the empty interior of the tower. So this tower is 10 meters tall. Visitors can enter it. They look up and they see this big empty volume of marble, which also has something nearly like a cathedral or something incredible.
It's, yeah, very uplifting from the weight and also the color of it, because also like the other towers. Also, this town has 3 other towers, so we needed a 4th one, I guess. And
there is one even interesting element. When you experience a tower, the sound and the echo of almost of your own breathing changes completely the experience of the tower. What appears to be monolithic and heavy suddenly becomes very fragile and ready to accommodate our own rhythm of breathing. And I think that
never can go inside.
Well, yes.
I mean, this is an experience that for you, you go inside, so you're inside one block, and then it's a different sound, a different smell, a different temperature.
And this is even opening up an interesting perspective on the relationship which is always contested between inside and outside, which is another interesting aspect that we can see even in the next image.
So in Somerset, for your exhibition, you also realized a tower, and that tower was called, or is called, Cannot Enter, Cannot Exit. And it's a little more complex, so it's not just monolithic, but it is made out of different elements that also relate to the site of
it's surrounded by hay bales to preserve food, right? Well, you can see it around here, or you can see it here. And then
this one.
And then it has snowballs made out of ceramic in Beijing in China. And there's one of these hay bales is inside. You cannot enter obviously, but it cannot come out. That means like the installation in Romansch in Stalla means in the barn. So actually, this hay bale is inside the tower and could be digested by the tower itself. So yeah, it's about preserving, about consuming, like maybe related to boys or so, in some way. And also this hay bales, which are also in Somerset, it's we just installed 4 of them here in the Upper Engadine, in a very, very beautiful, in front of the lake of Silvaplana, which is a phenomenal site. And people walk next to it without realizing what they're looking at, if they look at something, because they believe this is the actual thing, that this is actually the hay bale, but it's a sculpture. So art has to do with change, with transformation. And so you pass by something that you are not actually aware of what you're looking at.
Yeah, it is an artwork, but it looks as if it is just
exactly. How far can you push?
Yeah. As if it is not. And can you explain about this beautiful object that we have here?
This is for the house in Patagonia, which we are going to call Tay later, I think. Yeah. It's the furniture. I mean, this has 3 functions. It's like a bed, it's a cradle, but it's also a
coffin. A coffin, yeah.
So it has also the shape of the house.
Which is another interesting element to discuss about the coexistence of different times within the same object.
Yes,
when
yes.
You're
I mean,
young,
of course,
like
how far can you go with the function of this is a house which is completely underground, but you can only see a very small house of 39 centimeters above ground, and that's where the light comes in. And so on. I mean,
for which site this is supposed to be? This underground house?
Where it's going to be in the other part of right next to Ticino.
Ticino, yeah.
Maybe we can continue to walk through your house to see what else there is.
This is another thing, this is Caldam, which I did in the 90s. I paid 1,000 rupees to finance a children's hospital in Kathmandu, outside of Kathmandu.
In Nepal.
In Nepal.
Yeah. And here is your bathroom. I always smile when I walk by it because you always have a bathtub everywhere you live, and you always say that you hate showers and that bathtubs are so important.
Not that I hate, I simply don't understand showers. I mean, you usually go inside, it's too warm, it's too cold, and then it's something that I try to avoid. But here, yeah, this is actually where I also work, where I also make phone calls, which I don't do much, but
sorry, I'm just losing.
And actually, the bathtub already played an important role very early on in your work. So in 1970, you made a work entitled Casa e Bon, which is Romansh, and in English would translate to house and bathtub. So that's also a work of yours that's on view in Somerset.
Yeah.
Maybe we can see the slide.
We can see it already.
So it's like, that's very early. I was still in school, I remember. My grandfather had this object, this house, which he gave it to me, or I took it from him. And there was a big inspiration. I mean, I didn't know what it was, I didn't know if he knew. And then I just added the bathtub, these 2 elements, enough, which are enough to live, even though most of the works I'm doing, most of the houses I'm building don't have infrastructure. You know, it's not built in the conventional sense where you have running water and a toilet and so on. So
but
I kind of went away from that idea, but this is very.
And
very
another early work of yours that's called Chanalanate, which translates into rainwater gutter and is also on view in Somerset, is also a sort of rectified ready-made. But whereas you combined 2 elements for Casa e Bon Here it's a rectified ready-made because you painted
And
the
it's
rain
painted,
horticulture.
yeah. And you know, everything has a story. I mean, it's all about storytelling in a way. I remember that when I was 12 years old, this professor and the director of the Kunsthalle and Kunstmuseum Bern, Buchler, he moved here just outside of the town, and I went there many times to look at his collection. But once I asked him, Professor, why is everything on canvas? And he said, no, look at the Schwitters over there. The Schwitters is on wood, so I could take the Schwitters off the wall, could go outside studying. And so I came back and they redid the roof in the house. And this was on the floor, so I took it, I painted white.
There is even an interesting, again, dialectics between the intimacy of the Bastard and the breathtaking view of the Alps outside. I just point out for our spectators because it is one of the most stunning parts of the Valley.
And also you can see that the bathtub is not straight. It has to be so that I can see the mountain.
Ah, yes.
And
it's all detailed.
And this relation between inside and outside that is always prevalent in spaces for living is also one that plays an important role in your work. So for example, you created this sculpture that is entitled Day, which is also on view in Somerset, where the interior and the exterior are inverted.
Yeah, and actually just in the opposite way, right? Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of surprise, I guess. I mean, if you look at your surroundings, walk through the city, walk through your town, you can make a pretty good image just by looking outside of the house that looks inside. So in my case, like if you look at the studio, they have no idea what's inside. So it's completely a different world inside. And this is also the date to create that kind of like difference between inside and outside. The Innenwelt, the Außenwelt, the Innenwelt. Yeah. You know? But it's also with humans the same. I mean, you see someone, but the inside can be quite different from the outside. So I've been doing that to do, especially in the houses. Also, are we looking at the house?
There is also work of yours that is in your living room here, a sculpture that you made using marble and plaster that illustrates this tension or this inversion between inside. We're in the kitchen now.
Yeah.
Maybe we can follow now to the living room. Exactly.
Yeah, this is made in, I mean, the song comes from the south of China, Dali, the city of Dali. In Chinese, Dali means also marble. And what happened here is that it was cut and this came out. And in many ways, it's always in that region, if you cut the stone, you find in the stone what is outside, which is remarkable. Because if you cut this also further in, you have a completely different image. And then I added this opening here. At the beginning, I wasn't aware that this is actually the shape of the houses here in the Engadine. We have this very, very strong.
The shape of the windows that we have here. Yeah.
In fact, the thickness of the walls, as you can see here, is so.
So like you have to bring in the light, and you have this opening, right? You have to open it because you can't take a big window, otherwise you would lose the heat. So,
but this work is so stunning and complex in a way, because what we see here is a figuration that holds the outside world, but that is actually found in the interior within a stone, and then it is framed with a negative shape of a window. So you look at the negative shape of a window and you look at something, but you look into something.
It's like looking in the mirror.
Yeah, it's
it's
like a game.
And also like here you see, like, this is great. I mean, you just were lucky enough to find this one, which was like a kiss, but behind there's
no figure.
Gone, right?
So it is all depending on the depth of the cutting.
You have to find the right moment, the right cut, right? I mean, it's amazing that you find this in China. Afterwards, I thought, why don't we do it in Italy? Why don't we do it in Greece the same way? Why don't we do what is in the stone? But this is probably also related to Confucius and the whole philosophy.
But then you not only did sculptures that deal with this inversion or that are made by using marble, but you in Patagonia in Chile also realized a sort of monumental project for which you turned an entire marble island into a project. Maybe we can look at the next slide where we see this island from outside. So this is an island naturally made out of marble.
There was like, it was again, luck, I guess, to find this beautiful island where I wanted to build actually the second house to watch the sunset for the Americans. But as I'm not an architect, and I don't have to build, I decided not to do it for reasons of beauty. The island was so magnificent. Because I was then suddenly confronted with something which was too much. I mean, it was like the island needed to be transformed into another. So I went inside. Actually, when you say I went into the tower in Zurich, I went into the marble. This is the same thing. It's just in a larger scale. You go inside the mountain, which happened to be marble, and it's 55 meters long. You have one slab of marble, and then you have this opening that goes to the west, and all what you can do, all what you can see from the lake is this little window with something.
So you dug a tunnel into the valley of the island together with the help of local miners, and then entering that 55-meter long tunnel that one can walk through, people reach a window from which they can see the surface of the lake. So again, there is this sort of one
is the sunset, you can see the mountain, but also people can see actually only one window, right? I mean, this was a big challenge also, and also there again finding people in the little village of Puerto Sanchez who had, most of them, or just about everyone in this village, worked on different mines, like the gold mine, copper mines. So they were very good with explosives. I didn't know at the time how exact it can be. You can make a round form with dynamite, and so this was really a big work that took 6.5 years, I think, to make it. But at the end, it's done. And it's good enough just to go there for 3 days or 4, because it's 2 days.
Can you explain these works?
Well, this is like what we have also on the tower in Somerset. These are snowballs in ceramic.
Wonderful, wonderful. Eventually, we can pass to the next room.
Room where it's also very conceptual. It's actually drawings I did for my mother's birthday. Here she's 95, 96, 97, 99, and 100.
With 90.
Yeah, here she
7 dots.
Yes, and here it's like 100. So it's like I left this room as is after she died. So this is 100.
Here we're entering the terrace.
The
outside. This is inside.
Yeah.
But this is a space where we normally eat here at the studio, and often we're a lot of different people from everywhere in the world, but now we're much less people, of course, because of the current situation. But Stefano noted the other day when he was visiting that there are inscriptions on the wall with the countries
sitting, right?
of the respective people. It was a dinner and everybody was sitting somewhere.
I tried to
And
focus
then in
on-
that respective place,
Yeah.
not
Italy.
wrote down their
Italy.
country of origin. So there's Italy, there's Georgia,
This is
there's Portugal.
A second, I just tried to focus on this detail. It's interesting because it's like if all of the countries of the world in a way converge in this beautiful Switzerland. Cuba and Spain. Brazil. China.
And of course you work with people from everywhere in the world because the nature of your artistic practice is so global, and because you have projects in very remote places and in countries in which people speak different languages. So you work with people that speak Portuguese, people that speak Spanish, people that speak Chinese. So
yeah, and this is in a way is defining even like the global outreach of your practice. This room reveals the intensity of this exchange. You operate globally, and yet the globality converges in this beautiful studio, which is facing this wonderful building, which is the studio.
Inside the window.
Yeah.
yeah,
To the
that's
world.
not
This is
painting
the studio.
studio.
Can you tell us how you came up with this beautiful?
Well, as you can see, I mean, you have this fantastic view. And if I would have had a studio with windows, I would just have looked at the view. I could not work. So like this studio has no windows. It only has like a light coming in from the north, but inside it's completely windowless.
Wonderful.
And it works actually.
And the concrete is a very peculiar quality. It's probably sprayed concrete.
Yeah, sprayed concrete.
Yeah.
And it also, it's very white in some parts. And in the winter time, this is completely covered with snow. So.
And it looks like a sort of rock or monolith that has fallen down from the mountain.
Actually, you know, this one is a monolith on top.
Oh, that's a meteorite.
Meteorite, yeah.
Yeah.
Meteorite that came from.
Yeah, and I think that with this message of hope from another planet, a meteorite, I would like to thank you very much, Not, and I would like to thank you, Georgia, for your kindness. And I greet everyone from the Engadin, and we can send my regards to all our spectators.
I think there is a Q&A now.
I think that probably Dia could help us I just received the message if we could discuss about Not's project in Patagonia.
Which is dead.
Sorry, yes, exactly.
It's this island this island where you excavated the whole interior.
Yes, excellent.
In marble.
Yeah.
So that's a sort of project where instead of building a house on top of the island, Not transformed the island into the house. And he also worked with a Chilean architect whose name is Cristian Orellana. He worked with local miners, and that was really, perhaps it was your longest project so far.
Yes,
in terms
it was
of
like probably the
realization.
most difficult also because it's so far away. It was like to organize the whole thing was huge.
They asked me what exhibitions are coming up at the gallery in the Tarashi castle and when.
So in Tarashi, we are currently, so Not has a foundation that is comprised of 3 sites. The sort of oldest site of the foundation is the sculpture park that Not has in St with a lot of his own interventions. Not also has a historic house in the village of our deads, whose mandate also is to sort of foster Romansh language, so Not build up a very significant library of ancient Romansh writings, and we also continue to publish in Romansh, such as most recently a collection of Not's own writings. There we are currently showing an exhibition of Not that is entitled Snow, and that is a sort of prelude to an intervention of Not in the town of our deads. So maybe you can tell people what you are planning for the town of our deads.
The windows of the local church. that I want to do this 4 windows. Now,
So not paint.
it's already actually done before I got the permission to install it, but that's how sometimes things happen.
That's how
You know,
fast you
like,
are.
well, it's just like, I think for certain projects, it's maybe difficult for people to imagine. So if they can see it, maybe they can help. But
yeah. Another question is about your inspiration as a young artist. I was quite intrigued by the fact that you were confined in a small village, and yet in this house where you were born, you were able to find like the language that informed the rest of your career. Once they said that this idea of the studio was very important for Bruce Nauman, for example, as well, because he managed to discover the frontier of the West within his own studio. And I have the impression that the studio played a very important role. And before that, what was your inspiration as a young artist?
I started actually at the beginning, when I was still in high school. I was just reading today that I translated The Little Prince in Romansh. So there was like, my idea was maybe trying to become maybe a writer or a poet, but my mother language is only spoken by 60,000, at the most 60,000 people, and my language is only spoken probably dialect by 5,000 people. So very early I probably knew that I could not make a living from it, so I had to move on to do something like what I did. Like, and I must say, as I said before, I think the impulse of Huckler was quite important, even though I was not aware till much later to be here and like this person who had this collection outside of town, and so that was like I think a real important impulse, because like there was nothing. I mean, we lived in this valley quite isolated. TV was. We didn't have TV, and by
you
the time,
still don't have TV.
I still don't have TV. But like when the first TVs came here, they were already in color.
Yeah. But you also traveled very early on. So you went to Paris, and then you lived in Rome for a while, where you had a street circus, and then you moved to New York. So I feel what Stefano said is very true, that this sort of home and the studio practice, and also like your native surroundings, the Engadine as a valley, are very important in your work. But you have also always traveled and gone abroad for other inspiration.
Yeah, I think that it was like one great thing about living here, and as I said before, I mean, without TV and so you could build a great platform, a great base where you could also build on top. I was very aware of that when I first went to New York, because I went to New York, and coming from here, New York was the city, the whole city where I could move around. But people coming from other cities, they would find only part of it, you know, like which resembled their own city, their own bar would be like on East 8th Street, and that's what for me, I didn't have that.
You had
it was
like
much open, because but I think this platform was excellent.
I would like to thank you very much, because this is really a wonderful way even to reveal the complexity of the practice of an artist that really and truly works globally, which is a wonderful wish and promise for the artist for especially young artists to operate and to act in the future. Thank you, Not, and thank you, Giorgia.
Thank you to everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.